إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون الذين يقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون أولئك هم المؤمنون حقا لهم درجات عند ربهم ومغفرة ورزق كريم صدق الله العظيم. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم آمين يا رب العالمين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. O you who have believed, have taqwa of Allah the way He is deserving of it, and do not die except for in a state of submission and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. O you who have believed, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say the truth. Say the truth even if it's against yourself. For if you do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will rectify your life. He will fix your life, which will fix your akhirah. And He will forgive all your sins. And those who obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Rasul, not His desires, have indeed achieved a great success. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst them. Allahumma ameen. My brothers and sisters, we have arrived at the third Jummu'ah of Ramadan, in the last 10 days of Ramadan. The hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ mentions that the first 10 days of Ramadan are for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the second 10 days are for the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the last 10 days are freedom from hellfire. In a month where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees people from hellfire. Allahumma ajirna min an-nar. May Allah protect us from the hellfire. Allahumma ameen. And yesterday night, which was a Friday night, was the first of the odd nights. And subhanAllah, we don't have any evidence of it, but it could be an odd Laylatul Qadr because it was Jumu'ah combined with a or night. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. There's no evidence of it, but I looked at the sun this morning. It was pretty bright. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Inshallah, we have more chances for another 9 more days. Bidnillahi ta'ala. We all know the blessings and fada'il of Laylatul Qadr. I'll just remind you really quickly. We go over it every year. But you've gone over it 50 times if you're 50 years old, 40 times if you're 40 years old, and the like. Laylatul Qadr is called Qadr because of a few reasons. Number one is Qadr means constriction. Constriction because too many angels on that night descend on the ground with Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, who doesn't come down except for that night only. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes down to the lowest heaven the way that befits His Majesty. And on that night also, Qadr is decisions. Decisions are made for the next year. What's going to happen to you? Where are you going to be? Are you going to go for Hajj? What's your financial situation? What's your mental situation, physical situation, and whatnot? So it's a day of dua. It's a night of dua, where if you make the dua, your Qadr can change. I don't want to get into the discussion, but I will. About the Qadr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote down what's going to happen to all of humanity 50,000 years, all of creation, 50,000 years before creation. Sahih hadith of Rasul sallallahu. That never changes. This is Kitab, which is in Lawh al-Mahfuz. But to use modern terminology, in the words of Umar Sulaiman, may Allah bless him, he used nice words. He said, it's like downloading from that Lawh al-Mahfuz and giving to the angels for what's going to happen for the next year. Makes sense? So when you make dua, dua does not change Lawh al-Mahfuz. It doesn't change that. But your dua, your charity, Rasul said, as-sadaqatu yadfa'ul bala, it removes bala from you. And Rasul said, if you are good to your relations, your life increases. So these things increase and your life and change your qadr. But it changes the Laylatul Qadr, which is the next year's one. That change is already written there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, you can come and ask me later. So Laylatul Qadr is a night of making dua. When it comes to dua, you have to understand, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't answer your dua, it doesn't mean He doesn't love you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers your dua always. Always. There is never that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not answer your dua. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers your dua in one of 3 ways. It's just different answer than what you want. Number 1, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer it immediately. Number 2, if it's not good for you, because you don't know what's good for you, bad for you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will either delay it for you in this dunya or give it to you in the akhirah when you need it the most. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove something from your path, from your life, that was supposed to give you loads of a headache, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just saved you from it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always answers dua. When a person goes to Allah on the day of judgment, he's going to see mountains of good deeds piled up. And he's going to ask, Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I didn't do this many good deeds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is all the du'as that you made. At that point, the person is going to wish that he had asked for more du'as and they were not answered, so that he could get it on the day of judgment. So Laylatul Qadr is a night of dua, make dua, but the dua doesn't mean, Ya Allah, make me millionaire, the next day you're going to become millionaire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us. The last thing about Laylatul Qadr, I mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. Laylatul Qadr starts from Maghrib. Some of the quick to-dos of Laylatul Qadr. It starts at Maghrib, it doesn't start after Taraweeh, right? A lot of times we tend to potentially lose Laylatul Qadr even before it starts. So make sure you pay attention from Maghrib, from Iftar. Don't talk about anyone, don't put down anyone, don't yell at anyone, use your tongue wisely. Give in charity on that night if you can, because if you catch Laylatul Qadr, you have caught your whole life's worth of good deeds with your charity. Engage in Qiyamul Layl, engage in Tilawatul Quran, engage in I'tikaf if you can. And all these acts of good deeds are there, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, for us to do, and stay away from sins most importantly, because you don't want to have a bucket that has a hole in it, and you keep on doing good deeds and you're just losing it from the hole. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us. Today's khutbah, I want to talk about a story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Qalam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a story of 2 gardens and a family who the father died from the family and left the family 2 gardens. We know the story, it's famous. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا بَلَوْنَاهُمْ كَمَا بَلَوْنَا أَصْحَابَ الْجَنَّةِ. We are testing the people of Quraysh just how we are testing, we tested the people of the two gardens in Surah Al-Qalam. Surah Al-Qalam is the second surah to be revealed. What is the test, Ya Allah? What is it that they failed at? What is it they were supposed to do and they didn't do? This is the subject of my khutbah, which is related to Ramadan and what's happening in the world today. So the ayah continues. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, long story short, I don't have time to go through the whole story and the ayat. I'll try to summarize it for you. The father was a very generous person and a very wealthy person. The father passes away. The inheritance is passed down to the children. The children were not as pious. The children's paradigm of thinking was not sourced by the Quran. The father, he wanted ajr from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The children, they wanted the dunya. They weren't focused on the akhirah as much because the father donated and the children didn't. So what they did, they said, look, father passed away. He used to give a portion of the crops, of everything, of all the prophets. He used to give a portion of the profit and he used to leave it for the poor and the masakin that need the money. We don't need to do that much. We don't need to give 60, 70, 80%. Let's only give maybe 5, 10%, maybe 2, 3%, whatever. Just whoever we can as symbolic. And we take the rest of it. But everyone knows in the society that at the time of harvest, on the day of the 1st of December, for example, every single year, this person does his bills and he gives poor people money. So everyone knows on that day, all the poor people to go by the garden and wait for their check. These guys know that too. So what they said, listen, let's leave early in the morning whilst keeping our voices quiet so no one knows that we're there, and get all the crops before everyone wakes up so that when they come they don't find anything and the crop's going to be empty. That's what they planned. And subhanallah, they discussed it, they planned it, they went to sleep. The next day, they took their car, they go to the place, and they're like, oh, we lost the way. Maybe we should go that way. They took a different path and they came around eventually until they realized that this is the same place that their garden used to be. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the garden to ashes. There's absolutely nothing there. And subhanallah, we see in this story many lessons. Is that the rich person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave wealth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. There's a portion of it dedicated to the poor that is not yours, that is theirs. Allah gave it to you to test you if you're going to give it or not. But they failed the test miserably for the simple reason that Quran was not their paradigm. They were not thinking from a perspective of akhirah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَسْتَثْنُونَ. They didn't make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a partner in their dealings. They didn't think about the akhirah. They didn't think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And most importantly, they didn't think about the poor people, and they took the share of the poor people. And they were not only propagators of oppression, they wanted that to happen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Quraysh, إِنَّا بَلَوْنَاهُمْ كَمَا بَلَوْنَا أَصْحَابَ الْجَنَّةِ. We tested them and they failed the test by not giving the poor what they deserve. And what they wanted to happen to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did that to them. This brings me to the point of my khutbah. I've been talking about this hadith many times in the last week. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is the paradigm of the Quran that we should adopt this Ramadan. Ramadan is a month of change. It's the easiest time to change because shayateen are chained. And if you don't change now, you will never change. And if it's too late, you think it's not. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the last 10 nights would come, he would tighten his belly even more to go extra hard. Hasan al-Basri radhiyallahu anhu, he said that a racehorse runs faster near the end of the race, maybe he starts off slow. So if you think that you start off slow, no problem. There's still 10 days remaining, and these 10 days are more blessed than the 20 days that have passed. So there's no need to give up hope, and there's still time to change. But what do you change? You change your thinking, you change your paradigm, and that's what the Ramadan is for. Ramadan is the month of Quran, not just to recite and sing, so that you can change your thinking and align it with the Quran, so you can become a person of the Quran who can live by the Quran for the rest of your life. So what is the paradigm of the Quran that I want to discuss today? The paradigm, or the way of thinking, the frame of thinking of the Quran and Islam. Normally you see many khutab and lectures when it comes to the month of Ramadan focus on individual piety and rituals, which is correct. You should definitely focus on that and your qiyamul layl and your tahajjud, but there's not that much focus on what I'm about to talk about now. I'll give you a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, whoever relieves a slave of Allah from the burden of this dunya and the stresses of this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove the stresses from him on the day of judgment. The hadith continues, Rasulullah said, whoever makes easy for a person something, for another person in this dunya, another narration of the hadith, removes a debt from the person or forgives a debt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive his debt or make things easy for him in this dunya and the akhirah. Continuation, whoever hides a person's sins in this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hide his sins in this dunya and the akhirah. Continuation, Wallahu fi auni al-abdi ma kana abdu fi auni akhihi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the support of his slave, so long as the slave is in the support of other slaves. Other ahadith on this topic, Man la yarhamu la yurham. The one who doesn't have mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not have mercy on him. Another version or variation of this concept, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that when my slave does dhikr of me, I am with him. When he does my dhikr in a group of people, I do dhikr in a group of people that is better than the group of people where he is doing my dhikr. And if he walks towards me one step, I walk towards him 10 steps. And if he walks towards me, I run towards him. Another variation of this concept where kama tadinu tudan, like how you do, you will be done unto. As you can see from these ahadith and ayat, the concept that I'm trying to paint here is the heart, which is connects to the khutbah from last week about birr and piety. If you remember the khutbah from last week about birr and piety, this concept connects to you getting out of your own head, focusing on your own life, and focusing on the society, and focusing on other Muslims, and the Muslim as an ummah in general in the world. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, "Man la yahtamma bi amri al-muslimina falaysa minhum." The one who does not care about the affairs of the Muslims, he is not from amongst them. In effect, many a times we become hermit-like when we focus on our lives and our rituals at the expense of the society around you and the Muslim ummah around you. And subhanallah, if you look at the genocide in Gaza, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curse the munafiqeen and the oppressors who are doing the genocide. And it's not only in Gaza, it's in Yemen, it's in Sudan, it's in Kashmir, it's in India. Same thing that's happening in Gaza is happening in Kashmir. The cameras are just turned off. This, what's happening in the world today, is not only because of the perpetrators of the oppression, it's also because the lack of mobilization by the Muslim ummah. Lack of mobilization by the Muslim ummah. We sit and watch. We're part of it. And we're very busy when it comes, even in Ramadan, for example, Fajr, you're busy sleeping, Dhuhr, you're busy, maybe you come to the masjid for Fajr in the last 10 days, but Dhuhr, you're busy working, Asr, you're busy resting, you just come back from work or making iftar, Maghrib, you're busy eating iftar, and Isha, you come late for Taraweeh, you come late for Salat al-Isha, but you make it on time for Taraweeh, when Isha is fard, Taraweeh is sunnah. And Fajr is fard because now you pray Taraweeh and Qiyamul Layl and then you fall asleep so you don't make it for Fajr. We got our priorities upside down. Our priorities are lopsided. Our thinking is not the thinking of the Quran. We need to change that this Ramadan. We need to change our thinking this Ramadan to align it with the Quran. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه فيا فوز المستغفرين. الحمد لله وكفى وصلى الله وسلم على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على سيدنا المصطفى وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تلا اللهم اجعلنا منهم اللهم آمين يا رب العالمين. One hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ comes to mind where he said that helping a Muslim brother in need is more beloved to me than doing i'tikaf in the Masjid Nabwi for the whole month of Ramadan. Again, it shows that you as a Muslim are not supposed to just be focused on yourself. You're supposed to focus on people around you and the Muslim ummah as a whole. What does it mean for you as an action step? What are the next steps you're supposed to take? First step, and I'm sorry if this feels like I say this all the time and it's nothing new per se, but it goes to show you the importance of it. First step, why isn't your thinking aligned with the paradigm of the Quran in the first place? Because we don't read the Quran. We don't read the Quran. Sahaba, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, used to read 4 to 5 juz every day, at least 100 pages of Quran every day. And that's why their thinking was aligned with the Quran. And we could see it in their actions. When we see, for example, someone asking for money, let's say, just an example. It's the easiest example for me to think about right now for you to understand. Someone asks for money. First thought goes into your mind, how long is he going to go for? It's been 20 minutes. He's keep on going. When is fundraising going to finish? Oh, I have this bill, that bill, that bill, that bill. Fine, you can calculate a little bit. You have to pay your huquq. But you start doing calculations as you start thinking from a dunya perspective, and you're a little bit uncomfortable. Am I right? Am I wrong? You're a little bit uncomfortable when someone asks for money. Sahaba, on the other hand, they saw it as an opportunity, and when they were not able to give, they returned crying because they're not able to give. Do we see when someone asks for money as an opportunity or a burden or a stressful situation, an uncomfortable situation? When we look at life and death, Sahaba loved death. Bilal ibn Rabah, when he was passing away, his head was on the lap of his wife, and his wife was crying. He said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because you're dying." He said, "But I'm going to my beloved. You should be happy for me." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "I love to meet the one who loves to meet me." But when we look at death, first of all, do we even think about death? Do we go to the graveyard? Our perspective on death is opposite. Sahaba, death was in the forefront of their mind. For us, death is in the back of the mind. As we can see, it's opposite. So why is our mindset so different? Well, akhi, they used to read 100 pages of Quran every day. We don't. That's the first step. It's the first step. Make an intention in this month of Ramadan to change your life, to read the Quran with translation, because you don't understand the Arabic. Even if you speak Arabic, you don't understand the Arabic. Arabs today don't understand the Arabic. They might understand a little bit, but the classical Arabic is hard to understand. And if you don't know the tafsir in the context, you'll understand it the wrong way. You have to know the sabab nuzul and etc. etc. Point being, read the meaning of it every day. First change. Tayyib. Second change that you should make in this Ramadan, sacrifice. Second change is sacrifice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will not reach piety until you give from what you love. So find out what you love. No, seriously. If you really want to reach that level of piety, you will love your time. You love your comfort. You love your money. You love having tasty food, expensive food. See if you can tone down a little bit. I'm not saying give it up. You can if you want to. But tone it down. Everything. Inshallah, you'll get there someday. Your time, you love to spend it with family. You love to spend it working on your business to make more money. You love to spend it traveling. Ya akhi, give that to the masjid. Can you come and volunteer at the masjid? It's hard work. There's no accountability. There's no boss on top of you. If you do something wrong, no one's firing you. But can you, from your heart, come and put the hard work in to the masjid? Can you, from your money, give to the masjid? Give to the poor people that need it? And give up your dream, let's say, for this year. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace. Second step that you want to change in yourself is sacrifice. First thing is read the Quran, which will change your paradigm to think about akhirah and for you to pass the test. If you remember the story of the people of the garden, the father thought about dunya from the perspective of the akhirah. The kids thought about the dunya from the perspective of the dunya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the father more wealth where he was able to donate more. Until he died, he was wealthy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't give the kids the dunya and the akhirah. Both were taken away from them. بَلْ نَحْنُ مَحْرُومُونَ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not make us amongst them. Allahumma ameen. And the third thing and the final thing, I have 30 seconds to communicate this. There have become two extremes in the Muslim ummah today. One extreme focuses on the purpose of Islam and the mission of Islam to establish the justice of Islam and the system of Islam and the Sharia of Islam. That's one extreme where they focus only on that and not on the rituals. And there's a second extreme where they only focus on the rituals and not on establishing Islam. What we need to change as a whole collective, as a Muslim ummah, is connect both of them. Which is what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did. The La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu is the vision that was given to the Muslims, which is this, establishing Islam. But the first step to get there is, for example, understanding that that's the case. That's the first step to get there. Understanding that's the case. The second thing is to work on your rituals as a stepping stone on the path to get there. When you connect these two things, that's when we'll reach there. And that's what the Sahaba did. Sahaba prayed Qiyamul Layl half the night in the first night. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala softened their hearts. And this is the methodology of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Surah Al-Jum'ah says, يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِ هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. Prophet was sent for يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. Fix their understanding of La ilaha illallah. What's the purpose of Islam? Number one, Aqidah. Number one. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. And then he did tazkiyah. Purified their heart. Cleansed the evil from their heart. So the third thing that I'm saying here is first understand the mission of Islam, and second, do tazkiyah of yourself. The tazkiyah for us here comes in many factors and forms. One of the main things you can do is stop sectarianism and fighting other people. This is one of the action points that we can do. So I mentioned a few action points. Number one, read the Quran. If you can, 100 pages a day, that would be amazing. It will not take you, read in English, read in your own language. It will not take you more than half an hour if you get used to it. Second thing, increase the amounts of sacrifice you do starting in this month, especially from what you love. And number three, work on your tazkiyah while understanding the mission of Islam. In working in your tazkiyah, first thing you want to do is eliminate sectarianism so we can enable unity between each other. Love your brother for the sake of Allah. Forgive your brother for the sake of Allah. Overlook his faults for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that Allah can love you, Allah can forgive you, Allah can look over your faults. Because if you don't do that, Allah will not do that to you. And if you see someone being a proponent of disunity, someone is proposing disunity, they're talking about fighting this guy, that guy, that guy, you need to step up and say, brother, stop. We don't do this in Saskatoon. We're here to unite people, khalas. That's your opinion. Try to make islah between the people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not easy, it's very hard. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the understanding. For you to do that, you have to have a clean heart. And you get the clean heart by fasting, by reading Quran, by giving from what you love, by visiting the masjid more often. You're in an environment of materialism outside all the time. When you come to the masjid, you have a pure environment. You visit the masjid more often, etc., etc., etc. May Allah allow us to clean our hearts. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Anything good I've said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything bad I've said is from shaitan and myself. May Allah forgive me if I'm wrong. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite the ummah. May Allah clean our hearts. May Allah give Jannatul Firdaus to all those who passed away. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure our sick. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroy the oppressors and the munafiqeen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give strength to our Muslim brothers and sisters in Gaza and all across the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept their shuhada. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure their sick and their suffering. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthen them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase their iman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for them and all of us. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa qala Allah ta'ala, Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. أقم الصلاة. Bismillah. Fill the gaps, inshallah. Stand shoulder to shoulder. There's people still coming in from the back. See if we can accommodate them, inshallah. Don't start a second row until the first row completes, inshallah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.